The last thing I'm going to show you today is how to merge these in Lightroom, which is much easier than using Photoshop and maybe some other tools. So it's become quite easy to do, but just keep in mind, Lightroom versus Photoshop, you're not going to have as many options. It's very simple, but you may not have as many options to tweak the image. So let's first put a panoramic image together. So I have 3 images I have imported for making a panoramic. Again, all the exposures should be consistent and the same. So if I look over here, it shouldn't be moving, even though it looks like this one did move a little bit, but the exposures are looking accurate. So I'm going to be selecting, make sure all 3 are selected, and I am going to go up to my photo option at the very top and go to Photo Merge and choose Panorama. It is going to create a panorama preview, so it automatically puts all these images together. I can decide if I want it spherical, cylindrical, or perspective. I also can turn auto selection projection on, which it will build another preview. I also can turn auto crop on or decide to crop it myself. So it did that automatically. I'm going to just turn it off in this case to use the regular crop tool, or again I can just do auto crop. So I hit merge and it's going to duplicate all these images into one image. So it's creating my panorama up at the top. So now I have a panoramic image. If I did want to crop more, or I did not choose auto crop, remember you can go into your developing tool and you have your, sorry, it's still loading. You have your crop tool right here that you can adjust and crop your image. In fact, if I did not like how it cropped, I can go back and change it. It still has the original results up above. Now, depending on how much you shift and moved, you might have more or less cropping. So if you used a tripod, you might have a cleaner range, where if you were hand holding, there might be a huge shift of how the image merges together. If it does not work, then I suggest just go out and shoot again, because it all depends on how well you're shooting. Go back to library. So that is panorama. It is quite easy in Lightroom. High dynamic range is easy as well. So I'm using these 4 different images. Notice that the aperture stays the same and my shutter speed is what is changing. So this is exposure that is nicely lit in this room, but then the exposure is getting darker, so my shutter speed is getting shorter, but it's getting more exposed for the light coming through the windows. So high dynamic range is going to take all these exposures and bring them together, so even the highlights and the shadow areas are all correctly exposed. So again, I'm going to select all 4 images. I'm going to go into Photo and go into Photo Merge HDR. This is creating an HDR preview, and as that is loading, notice that you have a few options. You can choose to check on auto align or auto tone, which I suggest that you do, but you can turn off and on to see how it changes it. And then we also have deghosting amount. So deghosting was what I was talking about earlier. It tries, if there's some shifting between the images, it tries to remove it. This looks pretty good, where I have an exposure that's correctly lit for the living room, but the background, I still have the information coming through the windows. I can change how much it's being deghosted here as well, and you can choose what looks correct for your image. Once it's done, you will hit merge and it will duplicate your image. Once it creates this, duplicates all these images into one, you will export your HDR, high dynamic range image, and your panoramic image into an album in Flickr for all of us to view.